Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us again for our online version of our church. We are here in Southwest Missouri, and we are aware that on this date, there have been 110,000 deaths in the United States from the COVID virus. And while it has slowed its spread on the East Coast, it is actually increasing in numbers of cases daily by 20,000 new diagnoses, 1,000 deaths a day. And at this point, Utah and Arizona are reaching the maximum of their hospital capacity. So we are anticipating a wave of COVID-19 in our own area. Wherever you are, we hope that you are doing everything you can to remain safe. We have become, other than for a dozen or so folks who join us for our recording sessions, we have become an online church, and we are dependent on the donations of those who view us online for us to stay in business. We appreciate all of you who've been donating all along, and if any others of you would like to step out of the shadows, we're a small operation. So small that I empty the garbage and mow the grass myself. So it's a pretty tight ship we run here. Our music director's been trimming the hedges and cutting up down limbs, and Andrew has been coming in and trimming hedges. So we don't have much overhead here, but it still takes us about $120,000 a year to operate our church. So we appreciate everyone who helps us with that.
Let's meditate together. We gather as a group of basically good people. We are generally relatively harmless, and we have been known to be quite generous with family members and friends, and notably kind, even to strangers in need. Yet confess that it isn't always easy to love critics and others who have done us harm. We have been known to think more out of prejudice than out of informed grace where some people are concerned. Together, we strive to strengthen our commitment to compassion, to find peaceful ways to resolve conflicts, and to create an environment where love can flourish.
Don't want to be an American idiot. Don't want a nation under the new media. Hey, can you hear the sound of hysteria? The subliminal mind F of America. Welcome to a new kind of tension all across the alien nation, where everything isn't meant to be okay. Television dreams of tomorrow, we're not the ones who meant to follow, for that's enough to argue. Well, maybe I'm the weirdo America. I'm not part of a redneck agenda. Now everybody do the propaganda and sing along to the age of paranoia. Welcome to a new kind of tension all across the alien nation, where everything isn't meant to be okay. Television dreams of tomorrow, we're not the ones who meant to follow, for that's enough to argue. Don't want to be an American idiot. One nation controlled by the media. Information age of hysteria. It's calling out to idiot America. Welcome to a new kind of tension all across the alien nation, where everything isn't meant to be okay. Television dreams of tomorrow, we're not the ones who meant to follow, for that's enough to argue.
Our wisdom lesson from today is from Winston Churchill. You will never reach your destination if you stop and throw stones at every dog that barks.
tried to be what I am not. I've lied and I've enjoyed it all my life. I lied to my dear mother, to my sisters and my brother, and now I'm lying to my children and my wife. Big heads, no cattle. Big head, no brain. Big snake, no rattle. I forever remain. Big head, no cattle. I knew from the start. Big boat, no paddle. Big belly, no heart. Can't remember why I do it. Oh, maybe I can. An honest man these days is hard to find. I only know we're living in an unforgiving land, and a little lie can buy some real big peace of mind. Oftentimes I've wondered, what might I have become had I buckled down and really tried? But when it came down to the wire, I called my family to my side. I stood up straight, threw my head back, and I lied, lied, lied. Big head, no cattle. Big shoes, well, you know. Big horse, no saddle. He goes wherever I go. Big hat, no cattle. Right from the start. Big guns, no battle. Big belly, no heart. And when it came down to the wire, I called my family to my side. Stood up straight, threw my head back, and I lied, lied, lied. Lied, lied, lied. Big head, no cattle. Big head, no brain. Big snake, no rattle. I forever remain. Big head, no cattle. I knew from the start. Big boat, no paddle. Big belly, no heart. Big boat, no paddle. Big belly, no heart.
In a game of Monopoly, the goal of the game is to acquire so much property and money that you succeed in running all the other players into bankruptcy. When everyone else is totally broke, then you are the winner. That is the exact opposite of intelligent capitalism. In the kind of capitalism that can actually work, you want to foster an environment where everyone is making money, whether through acquisition of property or in production. That way, everyone wins. The only way for capitalism to work is for everyone in the system to win to the degree that they have the economic power to provide housing, either buying a house or renting a place, have transportation, food, clothing, health care, an occasional vacation, maybe even get a dog or two, or start collecting those precious moment statues. That keeps grandma out of the bingo halls, Sean. We do what we can. From the time that the ancient Phoenicians invented money, we've been trying to find the right way to tweak an economy so that we can encourage and reward productivity while fairly distributing wealth among the population. In the United States, we've done this poorly and we've done it well. In the period of time between the Roosevelt New Deal and the Reagan Revolution, we grew a strong middle class. We were able to expand home ownership and advance higher education. But once the Reagan administration came in and changed the tax structure, it has allowed for the creation of super wealthy families that have become wealthy by impoverishing the middle class and truly turning poverty into a violent way of living. That kind of economy fuels social ills. It comes in the form of crushing poverty, but it also almost always engenders racial strife, competition among ethnic groups, and it fosters rampant crime. Countries that have figured this out, that tax the wealthiest at a higher rate than the lower income classes, that distribute wealth by providing a healthy social safety net, those countries don't have much of a crime rate. They have very little murder. They have very little racial violence, certainly much less than we have of all those things. Inequality predictably creates anger among those that are on the lower end of the receiving scale of the economy. And if you are angry long enough, let's say a couple of generations or a couple of centuries, and that anger keeps building, eventually it will turn into anarchy. It's not complicated, it's predictable. You can see it happening. We've seen it happen in the United States before, and if you've been watching the news, you are seeing it now. There's an ancient Turkish proverb that says, "A hungry man is an angry man." The press currently seems to be absolutely shocked and amazed by the riots and looting in cities all across America. And while I certainly don't endorse it, I have to tell you, what surprises me is that it took so long to start. Black people have never been brought into the mainstream of the economy since the end of slavery. They have been forever invited to the monopoly game only to contribute their money and their labor, but never to be anything more than a temporary consumer who is slated in one way or another to lose the game. Police violence against blacks is a huge issue, but you would be ridiculous to think that was the only issue causing the rioting and looting. An economy constructed to keep blacks in menial labor and in persistent poverty, that's just a part of it. And expecting them then to collectively respect the authority of the police or to respect the private ownership on the other side of a pane of glass in a retail store, that's crazy. If we're not keeping our social contract with them, the notion that they would then keep their social contract with us is nuts. While I believe that the centralization of wealth in the hands of a few is a disastrous social ill, a truly evil form of economics, still, you have to acknowledge that the super wealthy among us are not all the same. The Walton family that owns Walmart and Jeff Bezos, who owns and operates Amazon, have amassed their wealth both through a certain business genius and expansion, but also by paying their virtual army of labor so little that the workforce is forced to turn to social welfare programs. So the super wealthy are being subsidized by welfare payments from the federal government and from state programs, food stamps, public housing, Medicaid, and other welfare programs. And I just want to beg you, don't let this slip past your awareness. Some of the richest families in the world are the largest recipients of public welfare because they have shifted their labor costs onto the public. I really, really want you to remember this. If you don't remember anything else from today's message, let me write it on the blackboard. In fact, would you say it with me? Some of the richest families in the world are also the largest recipients of public welfare because they have shifted their labor costs to the public. This is an obscenity that should not be legal, but corruption has been difficult to weed out of a country that was largely built on the genocide of Native Americans and the enslavement of black Africans. Why are people looting stores in their own neighborhoods? Easy. Income disparity. An unequal distribution of goods. So unequal, in fact, that some of the richest families in the world are also the largest recipients of public welfare. This, you have to understand, is part of the history of having a police force at all. We engaged in a demonstration here a few years ago. We got a couple of dozen of us to go and demonstrate in front of a local McDonald's, demonstrating for $15 an hour minimum wage. And within 10 minutes of arriving on the sidewalk, there were 8 police cars and a paddy wagon. And we weren't even blocking the property. We were slowing down the delivery of Egg McMuffins. The police work for businesses. They are concerned with profit. Now, when there's a domestic violence case on the north side of town near the McDonald's where we were just peacefully walking up and down the sidewalk, the police might take hours to come, if they come at all. So protect and serve? Sure, if you're talking about cash, they're protecting and serving business. They are not protecting and serving people. But then, as I was saying, the super wealthy are not all the same. So there are some more positive examples, Warren Buffett being one. Bill Gates, they try to use the power that comes to them through their wealth to do good things. Now, mind you, just because you are inclined towards being a good person doesn't justify an economic system that allows one family to accumulate such a huge fortune. But if you're going to do it, it's nice if you're good with the money. In this sense, we can truly say that we can hate the game, but not the player, if the player is trying to be a good person. You might wish that Bill Gates and Warren Buffett would just turn over their ginormous estates to a democratically governed trust, but they are a tad too enamored of their own genius to let their resources pass out of their own control. Still, imagine if you were Bill Gates, and in the last few years you had spent $50 billion on humanitarian causes, vaccinating 40 million kids against polio, and many other laudable causes. And he set up his estate so that most of his estate will go to public trust. But then you go on the internet that you invented, basically, and you read where some scientifically illiterate people are insisting that you are, in fact, promoting vaccines so that you can inject a GPS device in everybody, or that you are the mastermind behind a plot to kill off hundreds of millions of people to lower the population of the world. I mean, I don't know what it would feel like to be Bill Gates, but you could almost see how he would start acting like Mark Zuckerberg after reading that kind of stuff, that kind of slander. You can only hope that he's got enough integrity to not let him drive him to do what Zuckerberg is doing, which is allowing the Russian government to manipulate our presidential elections by accepting Facebook ads from Russian bots. They do, after all, pay. They pay in rubles, but, they pay. We can only hope that those who have benefited from a clearly ineffective form of capitalism will have the strength of ego to not be negatively affected by the barking dogs on the internet. It wasn't really Warren Buffett who said it, but I think it has the ring of someone with resources. They said, "You will continue to suffer if you have an emotional reaction to everything that is said about you. True power is in sitting back and observing things with logic. True power is in restraint. If words control you, that means everyone else can control you. Breathe and allow things to pass." As you all know, I had a column in the Springfield News Leader this past week, and I've been rather passionately pleading with our neighbors to take the COVID-19 pandemic seriously, to maintain the disciplines of wearing a mask in public and maintaining social distance, something that I would guess fewer than 10% of our peers in grocery and hardware stores are currently doing. The column was picked up and reposted in the St. Louis area, and I noticed that one person in our big sister in St. Louis said, "Well, I admire his leadership, but he must be awfully lonely down there." I always bristle when people in Kansas City and St. Louis are so dismissive of those of us who live in the Queen of the Ozarks. I get it. I admit that I have occasionally referred to our part of the state as Darwin's waiting room. But still, you have to acknowledge that St. Louis is hardly the Mensa Club capital of the world. They did give us Ferguson, after all. It's true enough, though, that being a liberal, particularly a liberal opinion writer here in one of the reddest parts of the country, can be pretty isolating. But I did reply to this woman, "Life got a lot better for me in the Ozarks when I gave up the desire to be popular. I don't like getting hate mail. I don't enjoy public derision. And though I refuse to be frightened by the occasional death threat, no one can say that they ignore those things with just reckless abandon. But when I first started writing for the News Leader 25 years ago, I had a particularly loathsome editor. I don't want to say Robert Ledger's name out loud, but he was an extremely difficult person for me to get along with. And I've rarely had an editor that I did get along with for lots of obvious reasons, but this guy was the worst. And yet he did give me one really valuable piece of advice that I've ever received in journalism. He said, "Criticism is the price you pay for airing your views in public." That should have been obvious to me, but I felt like people should be nice and civil in responding to my columns. But the fact is, if you're going to write something that someone doesn't agree with, you can expect criticism. And if you're not going to write something that people don't agree with, why are you writing? If it isn't something that provokes people to think in a different way, you're wasting paper and ink. Or have you not noticed that most of the opinion page these days is pieces written by people that say things like, "Apple pie is good," or "I remember the good old days very fondly, very fondly." I've regularly been called into the News Leader office for what I call a come to Jesus meeting. And the editor and publisher would always try to scold me in front of junior writers for writing such controversial pieces. And I consistently pointed out to them, which you could do repeatedly because Gannett changes those positions regularly. You never get the same editor or publisher for more than a few months at a time. But I would point out to them, if they looked at their online readership, that my columns were typically read more than 100 times more often than the people that they were paying to work for them full time, and I was just a volunteer writer. That creates a room full of red-faced newspaper executives, but you know, I've told you before, telling the truth in an empire of lies is just a form of treason. But I never wrote to become popular. I wrote to provoke. Journalism is writing something that someone doesn't want you to say. If you're only writing what people want you to say, we call that advertising. The same happens here. Why deliver a sermon that just feeds people back what they already believe? Why write a book if you're only going to offer confirmation of bias? But when it comes to a newspaper opinion column, if it doesn't make someone mad, you're wasting your time. Back when I was married some 25 years ago, my wife would sometimes get furious about my newspaper columns, telling me quite ferociously, "You are wasting your life. No one who reads your stuff ever changes their minds. No one ever pays attention to sermons." And there were times that I had to agree with her. She seemed right. But as James Baldwin has said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. If you only speak up when you're going to win the cause, then you will never speak up. I spoke up about gay marriage, for example, for 20 years before it became legal. I lost every battle, year after year after year. Concrete blocks thrown through the windshield of my car, paint on my car scraped clean, death threats called into the house. I lost and lost and lost until the day that we all won. The barking dogs of the world only want to keep progressives quiet. They want us to avoid controversy, criticism, conflict. And as long as they can keep us defending our privacy, defending our reputation, then we've already surrendered. Peace in the absence of justice is just surrender. Progressives have given up so easily, so often, for so long. We really need to stand up. I'm not encouraging you to be arrogant or condescending about this. I'll do that for you. But if we don't leave a trail of breadcrumbs for people who want to escape a mental prison of creedal religion or conservative politics, you have to accept that there's going to be a lot of blah, blah, blah criticism along the way. But just try to hear it like the bleating of sheep. Because, you know, lions don't lose a lot of sleep worrying about the opinions of sheep. If you know you are right, have courage, speak up. Almost all of us who are progressives now did not start out being an open-minded, aware person. I don't know where those kids are, but I never get to meet the people that were raised by really liberal, progressive, critical thinking parents. Most of us had to fight for it. And most of us can trace how we escaped the mental prison of conservative religion and right-wing politics, as well as Southern racism and American exceptionalism. And because we know that we managed to change, we cannot give up on believing that other people can change too. That other people can also learn to see their prejudice as hate and to stop it. To stop hoarding, to be considerate of others, to stop living in fear of science and facts. Someone in our history, probably several someones, confronted our comfortable prejudice, our conservative isolation, and the only way that we can show appropriate gratitude to those brave people is for us to be similarly brave ourselves. Now, I've mentioned the Dunning-Kruger research before, in which They demonstrate why and how those with the least information and who are the most intellectually challenged are often the most self-confident people we ever encounter, and they are the most likely to tell us endlessly about what we should think and how we should live. I do blame a lot of that on Fox News because it seems like they offer most of their content in condescending intonations, as if simply copying an attitude could turn C and D students into A and B students. Well-informed people really should expose themselves to both sides of an issue. But watching Fox is not exposing yourself to the conservative perspective. As you've heard me say before, I don't watch Fox News for exactly the same reason that I don't drink out of the toilet. Honestly, we could get more reliable information from our old magic 8-ball if you could find it, you know. Will Donald Trump win re-election in November? What does it say? Dear God, no. I hope it's right this time. The issue that has white America all in a twitter is their rather pious-sounding response to the news of vandalism and looting in response to the police killing of George Floyd. In fact, if you just listen to the news for the last 2 weeks, people breaking out store windows and stealing Lululemon yoga pants and athletic shoes, that seems to somehow be more important than the fact that 4 Minneapolis policemen held George Floyd's face in the pavement and choked him to death for 9 minutes, while there were paramedics and private citizens standing right there pleading with them. He's not moving, he can't breathe, check his pulse, let him up. I'm not saying that I endorse looting or that I agree with it, I'm just saying that I understand. And while white folk are busy shaking their heads with their tisk, tisk, tisk face on, you know that when Colin Kaepernick was kneeling in protest of police violence against blacks, that the entire league turned on him. He hasn't worked since. People were condemning him as that was the wrong way to protest. And then Bree Newsom, one of my favorite people in the world, shimmied up the pole in front of South Carolina's Capitol and brought down the Confederate flag, and she was charged with destroying public property. When rioters pull down statues of racists, they are said to be behaving illegally and inappropriately. It kind of makes me wonder, what do white racists want black people to do to protest? But here's a fact. These 4 former cops have been arrested and charged with murder because of the protesters and because of the looters and because of the rioters. Without them, these 4 guys would have already been exonerated. Passive protest has allowed almost all cops to get off without being sentenced or even charged or even losing their jobs or their rank in any way. The riots have been sparked by, among other things, excessive use of force by the police, and in an ultimate example of just how tone deaf the police forces can be, they've literally stepped up their abusive practices. They have used a National Guard helicopter to hover low over peaceful demonstrators, using the wash of the blades to disperse the crowd, the same way that they do in Iraq and Afghanistan on the battlefield. The president actually had flashbang grenades and tear gas used on peaceful demonstrators near the White House. And in Asheville, North Carolina, some medics had set up a first aid tent to provide first aid and water to demonstrators. And these riot-geared police, they have no badge, no insignia. We have no idea who they were. They might have walked straight off the set of Star Wars as Imperial Cruise soldiers. They just walked into the medic tent and destroyed all of their supplies, as if that was somehow legal. But what you can know is that they were acting on the orders of somebody in authority, like an occupation force treating American citizens as if they were the enemy. Last week, I was talking about the fact that when you put a bunch of white guys together on a police force, that their out-of-control machismo often takes over. But when you militarize the police, you put them in heavy armor, helmets, face shields, and then shields they carry in front of them with batons, then they really do start to act like an occupation army. You've probably all seen the video of police officers in Buffalo, New York, knocking down the 75-year-old man, cracked his skull, he's bleeding out of his ears, unconscious, in a pool of blood on the sidewalk, and they didn't even stop to help. I want to tell you this in complete sincerity. If you've got a kid or a grandkid who's working in law enforcement, this might be a good time for them to look for another job. When they have lost perspective this badly, when they treat citizens this way, then broken windows and stolen tennis shoes, that's not where this is going to end. If the police keep acting like the citizens are their enemy, then they can expect the citizens to return the favor. Police brutality has to end. As I was saying last week, no one can stop it faster than the cops themselves. If good cops stop abusive behavior of bad cops, this conversation could find a logical and peaceful end. But if they keep upholding that thin blue line, as represented when you see an American flag with a blue stripe in it, just like the one that at this minute is flying over the police headquarters here in Springfield, Missouri, then folks, I guarantee you, this will end very badly. Now, Dr. Sherman Wilkins is one of our members here who's also a professor of sociology. He's going to speak next week, and then a couple of weeks later, our other pastor, David Ketchum, will be speaking. And I hope that they will also be illuminating the concept that is currently in conversation about simply disbanding police forces altogether. Before white Europeans brought the concepts of police and jail to this continent, somehow 90 million Native Americans lived here and they didn't have a police force and they didn't have any jails. People in New Zealand are also currently talking about disbanding their police and closing their jails because the Maori Indians lived there for centuries without a police force and without a jail. Police and jails came into existence to keep slaves in slavery and to protect the wealthy, to protect the wealth of the rich from the masses of the poor that they kept in poverty through low wages. When there is not a huge income disparity, when everyone has the basics they need in life, there's virtually no need for a police force. Riots and looting are not the problem. They are symptoms of a problem that we have always been in a position to fix if we wanted to. So now is either a very frightening time in America, or it is a very hopeful time in America. And how we behave will determine the difference. Thanks.
This is Wondering Where the Lions Are by Bruce Cockburn. Sun's up, looks okay, the world survives into another day, and I'm thinking about eternity. Some kind of ecstasy got a hold on me. I had another dream about lions at the door. They weren't half as frightening as they were before, but I'm thinking about eternity. Some kind of ecstasy got a hold on me. And I'm wondering where the lions are, wondering where the lions are, wondering where the lions are, wondering where the lions are. I'm wondering where the lions are, wondering where the lions are, wondering where the lions are. Huge orange flying boat rises off a lake, 1,000-year-old petroglyphs doing a double take, pointing a finger at eternity. I'm sitting in the middle of this ecstasy. Young men marching, helmets shining in the sun, polished and precise like the brain behind the gun. Should be, they got me thinking about eternity, but some kind of ecstasy got a hold of me. And I'm wondering where the lions are, wondering where the lions are. I'm wondering where the lions are. Oh, I'm wondering where the lions are. Just wondering where the lions are, wondering where the lions are, wondering where the lions are.
There are lots of good reasons to be angry right now. There are lots of good reasons to be anxious. There are lots of good reasons to despair. And there are a lot of good reasons to just want to quit right now. And on any given day, we might feel all of those things in rapid turns. So let's also make a habit to pause every single day to remember we belong to a long tradition of people of resistance, of people insisting that not only things be different, things must be different. And while we don't know if what we do in this moment of history will have the impact that we want it to have, we do know that if we don't do anything at all, change won't be possible. So, stay 6 feet apart, wear a mask, smash the patriarchy, and go in peace to love and to serve.